We are very happy to bring this program to you. I know this is a different medium for so many people. It's hard to get used to, but I think we're all agile in nature, right? So we will adapt to all the things that life is throwing at us. So for this year, for Black History Month, we'll be presenting this virtual art show, The Power of Art in the Stories of African Americans. Once again, it's been put together by Thelma Armstrong, who has helped us here at the Monmouth County Library and throughout the county several years in presenting great programs for us. As you know, Thelma is a historian, a cultural activist, a mother, a grandmother, and just a great person to know in terms of how versatile she is, in terms of the quality of programs that she presents. So I'm not going to bore you anymore with my details. I'm going to turn you over to Thelma as we start our program. So Thelma, I don't know if you want to say a few words before we get started.
Well, yes. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you, Monmouth County Library. And thank to all of you who've been able to log on. I'm hoping that some other people will be able to join us. So today I want to talk about the power of African American stories, primarily in the art of Bisa Butler. So I want to begin by letting you know that history actually is the story of humans, all humans. But the larger narrative is most often controlled by those who hold the pen, the powerful, the privileged, the dominant. Fortunately, writers and artists within the African diaspora tell the stories of Black lives in North America, in South America, the Caribbean, Europe, and wherever Black people reside. According to the online magazine Movement of the African Diaspora, and I quote, "There has been widespread loss of cultural identity resulting from centuries spent displaced from the African continent. For the African diaspora, the motherland holds vital roots, history, and culture, and without proper restoration, the people will forever be fractured." End of quote. But within the diaspora itself, that fracture is also reflected in other ways as well. After 400 years, our communities continue to be marginalized, demoralized, brutalized, as Black people work alongside white counterparts, experiencing and creating history. Our own stories and our stories within the national context tend to be mostly ignored, unrecorded, or lost. We can't deny that there has been some change, given the election of an African American president and now a vice president, who is female at that. In the sea of evolving change, we can look to Butler's work as a means of tackling the fracture, that fracture from our ancestral home. Ms. Butler's art seeks certainly not full restoration, but a place to continue the restoration of that fracture, both within and without the diaspora. Ms. Butler may be among the first to address the fracture through art, but I believe that Marcus Garvey, one of the early Pan-Africanists, can certainly be called a pioneer of addressing the fracture with his Back to Africa movement during the early 20th century. And I'll say a bit more about Garvey later on in the presentation. To fully grasp the importance of connectedness to our ancestral past in Ms. Butler's work, allow me to share a brief historical review of the trajectory of African American art and artists in the telling of our stories. Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, one of the earliest American painters was Robert Selden Duncanson. And I will ask Andrea to show the slide, the image. That image is called Landscape with Rainbow. As you can see, the image is not a representation of African American art, but it was confirmation that African Americans had the ability and the talent to paint, as well as any white person. Duncanson was born in 1821. He died in 1872. He was a descendant of freed slaves whose family relocated east from Virginia. In fact, he was born in Seneca, New York. Even in that early period, he was regarded as one of America's well-known landscape artists. His art education was founded by abolitionists who sent him to Germany to study the art of the old European masters. But he was not yet able to tell his story or the story of Black people. But in a strange turn of destiny, after 162 years, the painting has now been woven into the narrative of both the African American story as well as the American story. As you will see from the next slide, there is the Republican Senator Roy Blunt presenting the newly inaugurated President of the United States, Joe Biden, with the very same painting. It is on loan from the Smithsonian American Art Museum, especially for the occasion. Landscape with Rainbow is an 1859 landscape of green fields dotted with cows. In the work, a tiny couple strolls across a lush countryside as cattle graze serenely under a lilac sky. A rainbow shimmers overhead. That piece of art was selected by First Lady Jill Biden, who saw a message of hope for our country reflected in the pastoral image. Another artist from that period, of course, was Edward Mitchell Bannister, who was born in 1828. And Bannister continued the work that Duncanson had begun, landscape, still life. But by the time Henry Ossawa Tanner came along, the African American story began to emerge. Tanner was born in 1859 and he died in 1937. He actually became the first Black artist to gain international acclaim. The next slide that Andrea will show you is one I am sure you are very familiar with. It is called The Banjo Lesson. Painting of an elderly Black man teaching a young Black boy how to play the banjo. Tanner attended Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts, and he also studied in Paris through the auspices of the abolitionists. Seeing such works in museums today offer little to no understanding of the difficulties faced by Black artists during the 19th century. According to the Smithsonian American Art Museum website, Edward Mitchell Bannister was harshly criticized by a reviewer in the New York Herald in 1867 who said, and I quote, "The Negro has an appreciation for art while being manifestly unable to produce it." However, in contemporary times, we are much more familiar with the works of celebrated visual artists such as Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, Augusta Savage, to name a few, very few, of those who emerged during the Harlem Renaissance in the early 20th century. The stories of African Americans flourished because their work focused on the aesthetics distinct to the Black experience in the US. Ms. Butler was greatly influenced by the artistry of Bearden's collages. And we will see one of those right now. African American stories continue through the work of artists who produced work during the Great Depression and on through the 1950s and 1960s, a period when African American artists focused their concerns on inequality, race relations, especially during the Civil Rights era. The artists were always seeking to capture the essence and struggles of African American stories, while also providing upliftment to Black communities. In the 1980s, a singular artist emerged and changed the art landscape for Black artists. He was Jean-Michel Basquiat. And I will say a little bit more about Mr. Basquiat later on in the presentation. Additionally, the establishment of African museums and historical societies were critical to forming a foundation to help empower Black artists and their work and promote the stories of African Americans. Organizations such as the Black Arts Movement and Africoba emerged, developing a Black aesthetic with a focus on Black liberation, as well as the pride and racial empowerment of the Civil Rights Movement. And while African American artists have been telling powerful stories through their art, there is still a vacuum when it comes to African American stories in connection to the pre-slavery past. In the universal world of art that is overflowing with myriad artistic expressions, one may wonder what else can be added to the canon to create something new, different, uniquely designed to speak to the African diaspora. Perhaps Ms. Butler has found a method through her art that can begin to fill a void, help solve the fractures of loss and displacement. A method that can also inspire emotional depth by connecting the diaspora to their ancestral home. Now in the 21st century, Bisa Butler has broadened the scope of telling African American stories through art. She uses the medium of textiles that have traditionally been marginalized. She uses textiles to interrogate the marginalization of her subjects. And she also uses scale and subtle detail to convey her subjects'
Did we lose Thelma?
the promise of youth and artistic legacies. These all represent the merging of artistic excellence with quilting magic that celebrate Black life. Butler also exploits a long history of quilting done by Black women in the South. As you will see, her quilts explode with color, and every fabric has a specific meaning. In explaining her work, she states, I use West African wax printed fabric, kente cloth, and the Dutch wax prints to communicate that my figures are of African descent and have a long, rich history behind them. Her use of African textiles and the dignity she bestows each individual serve to reconnect her subjects to their ancestral home. In essence, helping to return an identity that has been lost. Andrea will now share some biographical information on Ms. Butler, and that will be followed by a short video of Ms. Butler in her own words.
Okay. Bisa Butler was born and raised in South Orange, New Jersey. She's the youngest of 4 siblings. Her father hailed from Ghana and her mother an African American from the South. She currently resides in West Orange, New Jersey, and is a Newark public school art teacher. A formally trained artist, Butler graduated with honors from Howard University with a bachelor's in fine art. It was her education at Howard that Butler said was able to refine her natural talents under the tutelage of lecturers such as Louis Mallow Jones, Elizabeth Catlett, and Ernie Barnes. While at Howard, Butler also studied the works of Romare Bearden, Faith Ringgold, and Henry O. Tanner. While in the process of obtaining her master's degree on the road to a career as an art teacher, Butler took a fiber art class, and that inspired her to finally realize how to express her art. As a child, she grew up always watching her mother and grandmother sew, and they taught her. And after that fiber class, she made a quilt for her grandmother's, while her grandmother was on her deathbed. And she's had that quilt and has been quilting ever since. Miss Butler has had the honor of having her artwork displayed at the Smithsonian Museum of American History, Walt Disney World Epcot Center, the National Underground Railroad of Freedom Center, and the Katona Museum, as well as many other venues. So I will share with you this video of Bisa Butler. Just let me know if you can hear it.
My name is Bisa Butler, and I'm an artist who uses textiles to create quilted artworks. I would say that I was an artist from the very beginning. I was the kid who was always coloring, drawing, scribbling, just like all the other preschoolers. The only difference was that when other kids ran off to do other things, I still continued to draw. My mother's side is African American, and they're from New Orleans, Louisiana. And my father's side is from Ghana, West Africa. And I was raised in New Jersey. So that combination of like these different cultures all coming together in one household, it influenced me in a way that I was surrounded by art all the time. I was an art major at Howard University, and Howard University had a strong influence on my outlook on art. It informed me because there was a really strong tradition. It was one thing to teach your students how to construct a painting, how to compose an interesting composition, but how do you define an African American culture? And what is it that separates us but makes us stronger and better? My professors were part of a group called Afro-Cobra, and most of them came from the Afro-Cobra tradition. They even went so far as to throw out the paint palette that you would use. It was called the Beaux-Arts, or the European arts tradition, using white to lighten your artwork. That was unacceptable. So we were all like, what is this? Like, that was just a total flipping of ideas. We even had assignments where usually when you start a painting, your canvas is white. You think about a white canvas. We had assignments where the canvas was black, and now you paint on that. Like, so they wanted to sort of flip that and say, literally, this is a colored and black sensibility. And the palette that we used were colors that you would see more in African art or in African fabric. Bright orange, bright yellow, crimson, red, intense blue. And that color palette was called the Kool-Aid colors. And the Kool-Aid, yes, they were African colors, but there was always like that acknowledgement that this is an African American thing and this is a new thing. And that affects me a lot to this day. I'm not doing it on purpose, but when you look at my art, you're gonna see, you know, those Kool-Aid colors still. You're gonna see that bright crimson red and vermilion yellow and azul blue. Like, you're gonna see these intense shades. And those are the colors that I'm drawn to this day. One of the founders of Africover was Jeff Donaldson, who was the Dean of Fine Arts at Howard. So he's taking his Africover sensibility and bringing it directly into fine arts. As the dean, you're the one who sets the mission. And part of that mission was like, you have a responsibility to educate your people. You have a responsibility to have your people always be shown in a positive light. I still maintain that I never want my artwork to show my people in a bad light. We are people who've come a long way. We do struggle still. There's still a lot of social ills that are affecting my people. So I want to address that, but I also don't want this paternalistic view like, oh, poor them. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in seeing, look what we can do.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah. The subjects featured in Ms. Butler's work are, as you can see, African Americans, but they are mostly from ordinary walks of life who may have sat for a formal family portrait or may have been documented by a passing photographer. In this presentation, there are a few images that you will find familiar. As Ms. Butler notes, however, some of them, most of them, like the builders of the White House, have no names or captions to tell us who they are or who they were, but each and every one and their stories do matter. So our first slide is called, please move back up to the first slide. Thank you. Our first slide is called The Black Star Family. The full caption is actually Black Star Family, First Class Tickets to Liberia. And all of the descriptions that you will hear are actually Ms. Butler's own descriptions of her work. Butler imagines this family as a sophisticated, wealthy, early 20th century family about to embark on a trip to the African nation of Liberia, which was first established in 1822 as a settlement for freeborn and previously enslaved Black Americans. She situates her subjects within the historical Back to Africa movement, spearheaded by Marcus Garvey, who believed emancipation was only possible through self-governance in Liberia and sought to repatriate individuals of the Black diaspora to the continent through his Black Star line, which would transport both people and products. Butler encodes meaning into the piece because the Ghanaian flag, which consists of the Pan-African colors, red, gold, and green, features a black star in its center. This gesture is thought to be an homage to the shipping line and also a reference to Ghana's status as the first independent African nation of the 20th century. The life-size family pictured in Butler's Freedom, a fact that is signified by the father's jacket, embellished with the photographic portrait of South Africa's anti-apartheid leader, Nelson Mandela. And I'm not sure that you're able to see that image depicted in his jacket, but I do invite you after this session to go online and to take a closer look at the images that you've seen here. So the next slide features the artist Augusta Savage. She was one of the artists from the period of the Harlem Renaissance. And I included this slide because she was a sculptor, and you can see in the adjoining photo a bust of Marcus Garvey, and that bust was done by Augusta Savage, who is on the left of the screen. Now, just a little bit about Savage. She was born in 1892. And when you consider the time in which she lived, she had quite an illustrious career as a sculptor. She liked to tell the story that she left Florida in the early 1920s with only $4.60 in her purse, arrived in Harlem, got a job as an apartment caretaker, and enrolled at the Cooper Union School of Art, where she completed the 4-year course in 3 years. And she, of course, is among this long line of artists who have brought dignity and beauty to the telling of the stories of African Americans. One story that Augusta Savage liked to tell was that she said her father licked me 4 or 5 times a week and almost whipped all the art out of me, but she persevered. Our next slide is titled The Mighty Gents. In 1978, Richard Wesley, whom Butler has known since she was a child, wrote a play titled The Mighty Gents. It is a story of a gang who had conquered their rival gang and ruled the Central Ward of Newark. Butler depicts these men at the peak of their power. My gents are full of the anticipation and the swagger of youth and have not yet faced the disillusionment of adulthood. Butler uses clothing to show their social status and prosperity. One figure has a vest printed with images of apartment building windows, symbolizing the concrete jungle they rule over. Each gent wears immaculately spit-shine shoes. American men wear expensive footwear. A nice pair of shoes communicates to your peers that you are going places. One gent gazes off to the right, his jacket covered with different stars. These symbolically refer to Marcus Garvey and his United Negro Improvement Association, which encouraged African Americans to repatriate to Africa on the Black Star shipping line. His pants are made of the people of Ghana, are made from vibrant kente cloth created by the Asante and Yu people of Ghana, and probably the best known of all African textiles. It is a cloth primarily woven by men and connotes authority. The next slide is titled One Vote Can Change the World. Butler created this quilt as a tribute to the election of Barack Obama, the first African-American president. She states, "One vote can change the world" is my homage to the amazing, beautiful, and powerful images I saw of Americans lining up to vote in this election. I had always heard about the struggles African Americans went through in order to gain the right to vote. With being of Generation X, I had never witnessed the movement before. During this election, I witnessed people of all ages, economic circumstances, and races lining up to ensure that Mr. Barack Obama would be our next president. Our next slide is titled The Broom Jumpers. The title of the quilt refers to the ceremony of jumping the broom, which scholars have described as a de facto form of customary marriage in the antebellum South. African and African American peoples who were enslaved in America usually were not allowed to participate in sanctioned legal forms of matrimony. Jumping the broom, a ceremony with varied permutations across the South, provided a ritual bond. The attire of this young couple dates their union to the early 20th century, and the bride's wide brim hat with a print that shows a caged bird flying out to meet the call of her mate reinforces a message of liberation. The groom's trousers feature a printed design of large diamond rings set on a bright pink ground with a pointed starry pattern that suggests the sparkling and dazzling qualities of the ring on his finger. Similarly, the bride's hair, beautifully coiffed and composed of velvet flowers, embellished with glitter, complements the sparkly sensibility of the groom's trousers. Her petite and elegant purse that the bride carries, embellished with a single hibiscus flower, takes the place of a conventional bouquet. And the same white bloom also appears on the groom's jacket lapel as a boutonniere. The couple's calm and assured expressions convey a quiet confidence in the choice to join their lives and assert their right to pursue happiness. Southside Sunday Morning is a work based on a photograph by Russell Lee. It was Easter Sunday, 1941, and these 5 dapper young men on the south side of Chicago posed together, draped across the hood of a car. Butler does not include the car in her image. They're exuding all the confidence of youth. Butler's use of bright colors not found in any human skin allows viewers to concentrate on the nuances of the men's expressions and emotions rather than succumb to making overt associations about race. Four Little Girls, September 15th, 1963. The title of this work refers to the killing of 4 African American girls by members of the Ku Klux Klan who bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, a meeting place for civil rights leaders. And as an aside, one of the things I learned about Birmingham when I visited on a civil rights tour was that for many years, it was called, rather than Birmingham, it was called Bombingham. The bombing was described by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. as one of the most vicious and tragic crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. Butler accurately renders the girls' faces. 14-year-olds Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, and 11-year-old Carol Denise McNair. But she depicts them as younger and avoids any overt reference to the incident. She captures them as free spirits, twirling in their dresses and ready to go to church. Each girl is attired in her own distinct color, and the artist has paid particular attention to their expressions, building light and shadow into their facial features with layers of purples, pinks, and blues. Instead of depicting the violent historical event, Butler uses lively colors and dynamic designs to memorialize the girls. This is one of my favorite images, and every time I look at it, I almost can feel the movement in their beautiful dresses. I Am Not Your Negro. Butler's work is based on a photograph taken by Dorothea Lange in 1936. While the title derives from a 2016 documentary directed by Raoul Peck about the history of racism in the United States. In Butler's eyes, the man is a writer, a poet, a philosopher. The fabric of his pants has a specific meaning to the artist. The man is wearing airplanes on his pants because I imagine him being someone who lives in Europe, travels through Africa and Asia, but is an African American. The planes symbolize his travels and his cosmopolitan psyche, unlike so many of his peers in the US. According to Butler, the title means, I am a Black man, an African man, and I am not your Negro. I am not an intellectual inferior to anyone. And of course, when we look at this image, how could we not think of James Baldwin? Our next image is Jean-Michel Basquiat. This is Butler's homage to this young artist who certainly died before his time. Basquiat was an artist of Haitian and Puerto Rican descent, born in 1960 and died at the young age of 27 in 1988. He first achieved fame as part of a duo known as Same O. It was a graffiti tagline. His work depicted enigmatic epigrams in the cultural hotbed of the Lower East Side of Manhattan during the late 1970s, where rap and punk and street art coalesced into the early hip-hop music culture. But by the early 1980s, his neo-expressionist paintings were being exhibited in galleries and museums internationally. In the 1980s, he loomed as the singular African-American artist. At 21, Basquiat became the youngest artist to ever take part in the world-renowned Documenta in Cassell. At 22, he was the youngest to exhibit in the Whitney Biennial in New York, in addition to a retrospective of his art in 1992. According to the online site, Black Art in America, Basquiat is the patron patron saint for many Black artists today because he did the unprecedented. As a Black man, he achieved superstar status within the art world. His art even eclipsed that of his friend and fellow iconic artist, Andy Warhol. The myth of Basquiat is what has defined the era between the 1970s and 80s in Black art history. He allowed those Black artists who are successful in contemporary art today the space to do that. At a Sotheby's auction in May 2017, a 1982 painting by Basquiat, titled Untitled, depicting a Black skull with red and yellow rivulets, sold for $110.5 million, becoming one of the most expensive paintings ever purchased. It also set a new record high for an American artist at auction. The T is our next image, and it's based on a photograph taken on Easter Sunday outside the still extant St. Edmund's Episcopal Church on the south side of Chicago by the photographer Russell Lee. And so I guess on that Easter Sunday in Chicago, we had two photographers. The earlier photo of the young men draped over the car, that was by a woman photographer. Now Russell Lee takes the photograph of these ladies. Butler abstracts the original photograph's background and brings the women to the fore as poised and distinct individuals. Her addition of rich, striking colors and patterns help characterize them as part of a thriving Black middle class in Chicago. The women's shared comfort with one another and their intimate spill, quote unquote, the tea, an actual African American vernacular term synonymous with gossip or hidden truth. Butler creates a beautiful moment of strong Black female friendship and community, leaving us to wonder if we can be included in, quote unquote, the tea. Here Butler is wearing her feminist hat. She's making quite a profound feminist statement. This work tackles the issue of female genital mutilation. The artist discovered a photograph of a young girl from the Pokot tribe in Kenya who has just undergone a circumcision. Female genital mutilation. Covered in animal skins, the girl accepts help from several other women to walk toward a place where she can rest. In Butler's interpretation, the young woman looks directly toward the viewer, her eyes filled with pain. Unlike the women who hold her up on either side, the central figure's face is rendered in fabrics of deep purples, reds, and black. White fabric represents splashes of paint dripping down her face to indicate that she has undergone the procedure and is now considered pure. But Butler has added a stark white handprint, effectively making a statement about the need to end this practice, but also, as Butler herself has maintained, as a sign of empathy for the woman. She states, and I quote, "I want to show that human symbol of a hand on her heart, to show compassion and the idea of this female community taking care of its own." And let me just add that female genital mutilation is a practice of intentional injury to the genital organs of a girl or a woman for non-medical reasons. It is sadly a cultural norm in many countries of Africa and some as well in the Middle East. But it is not central to any religion. So now we will look at an image titled, "I Know Why the Caged Birds Sing." This work is based on a photograph of 4 young African-American women sitting confidently on the steps of Atlanta College in 1900. The title is taken from Maya Angelou's autobiography and is a metaphor for the way in which education will set these women free. Butler has carefully selected her fabrics to communicate what the 4 women represent to her. Their hats contain symbols such as the speedbird fabric, which refers to change, property, freedom, and transition. By being educated in college, these young women were going places their parents and grandparents could not have dreamed of. The many shiny earrings on the skirt symbolizes the culture of wealth in West Africa. The more wealth one has, the bigger one's earrings. The strength exuded by these women is vividly depicted with the red shoes print, which is meant as a symbol of power. The print is called Michelle Obama's Shoes and commemorates the Obama's visit to Ghana in 2009. Butler notes, and I quote, "It is no accident that Michelle Obama, our most highly educated First Lady, walked in these young women's footsteps." Life like it's golden. Butler created a portrait of Jill Scott, an American soul and R&B singer, songwriter with whom I'm sure you're all familiar. Here she has captured the radiance of the cover image of Scott's 2004 single titled Golden. This is the only work in Butler's collection to date that is entirely composed of American fabric, denim. Our next image is To God and Truth. That statement is the motto of the Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia, the first educational institution in the state of Georgia solely for African Americans. The quilt is based on a photograph of the school's baseball team in 1899. At this time, African Americans could not vote, and they lived in a deeply segregated state. The KKK was very active at this time, and the Black man could be lynched simply for looking at a white woman. These young men, however, are not only in college, but they are scholar athletes. Butler chooses fabrics for them that celebrate their African heritage. One in particular is of a leaping horse and is titled, "I Run Faster Than My Enemies," by the African American women who wear it. As Butler notes, the men are life-sized and demand to be noticed. Each one has a unique personality shown in their facial expressions and color schemes. There is even a little water boy, and he is very important because these young men are already showing him the way. Butler goes closer to home, and this image is of her dad. She created this portrait of her father, Dr. Zachary Yamba, in 2010. And she states, "I admire my father a lot. He was an African immigrant from Ghana in the 1960s. And you know, every parent says, I walked 10 miles to school." But he literally did walk 10 miles to school and eventually became a college president. Butler's father, President Emeritus of Essex County College, is the longest serving college president in New Jersey. He wears a suit, tie, and white shirt. Around his head is a band including gold stars, moons, and diamond shapes. In the Ghanaian culture, these symbols connote a reliable, wise leader and recall the traditional crown worn by an Ashanti chief. Butler uses kente cloth for her background, the expensive fabric reserved for royalty. And here is a figure that we are all familiar with, Frederick Douglass. And this is titled "The Storm, the Wind, and the Earthquake." Hardly have we ever seen Frederick Douglass attired so resplendently, given the somber nature of his lectures and speeches about the horror of slavery and the freedom of his people. He was mostly attired in a stern, dark suit. It is believed that Douglass was the most photographed person in the 19th century, and his likeness in this quilt is a composite of several photographic sources, which captures the subject's conviction and perseverance. After escaping slavery, Douglass, 1817 to 1895, became an influential orator, writer, and leader of the abolitionist movement. The work's title references a famous line from a July 5th, 1852 speech in which Douglass, alluding to a July 4th pyrotechnic display, admonished the celebration of freedom during a time of slavery. And I quote, "It is not the light that we need, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake." In that same searing speech in Rochester, New York, Douglass also said, "What to a slave is the 4th of July?" He condemned the hypocrisy of celebrating freedom during a time when slavery was still rampant on US soil. So I thought that we would look at a few more slides to get a sense of Butler's detailing, the way her work is detailed. You've seen the images. Her finished works are exclusively fabric. Her methods remain interdisciplinary. Photographs inform her compositions and figural choices. She layers fabrics as a painter might layer glazes, and she uses thread to draw, adding detail and texture. So these slides will provide a close-up view of the subtle details of her subjects. As you've heard, she layers fabrics, sometimes up to 3 or 4 layers of fabrics, stitching them together to create a process known as applique. We can move to the next slide. Butler works very hard at getting the contours and emotions of her subjects' faces just right. We can go to the next. She uses thread-like brushstrokes and glazes to define expressions, as you can see from this image. She uses also bright Technicolor cloth to represent the variations of Black skin complexions. And in this instance, she uses floral patterns of velvet outlined by thread to define the texture of Black hair. Next. Again, you can see her use of threads, of stitching to create texture. With such focus on details, a quilt can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months, depending on the size of the piece. She works mainly with black and white photographs of mostly unknown subjects. That gives her the freedom to choose the colors for each subject. You see here depicted loafers, and everything is clearly defined. You know, the town within the loafer, the laces, everything is so clearly defined through her use of colors and stitching and different types of fabrics. Next. Here we see even a simple subject such as a button is given the same level of detail that she gives to her work overall. She has brought a radical change to the type of quilting done after the Civil War by Black women in the rural South. Characteristics of those early quilts were large-scale patterns, asymmetry, improvisation, and the use of bold and contrasting colors. Here we see a glove, just so beautifully defined, and colors that complement each other. Next, please. Please back up one. Oh, sorry. Move ahead. Thanks. I like this image, and I really like the way Butler uses the thread to indicate that this man wears glasses, that he wears spectacles. I love also the detailing of his hat. And again, you see the different colors of fabric reflecting facial expressions and skin tones. Next, please. This is clearly a flip-flop. There's no denying that. And you can see that the subject is even wearing a toe ring. And she takes the pain to define even that. Next. Again, shoes. These are men's shoes. And again, so clearly defined through the use of colors and threads. You can clearly see the laces and the heel of the shoe and the pattern that she has created for this particular shoe. Again, another shoe with laces that are tied. Again, the same use of bold colors, bold fabrics. Butler is among a group of Black artists who have adopted portraiture, a form that was historically reserved for European aristocrats. She wants her subjects to be seen, to be regarded. and to be treated as equals. And let me end here with a quote from Miss Butler. She says, "I represent all of my figures with dignity and regal opulence, because that is my actual perspective of humanity." And this ends our slideshow. And now I am happy to hear from our audience. And also, if you have questions, I am happy to answer them to the best of my ability.
If you'd like to put your questions into the chat, we can repeat them, because we do have a number of people attending this evening, and we're very delighted to be able to share that with Ms. Armstrong.
I have a question that was submitted. Who are some of the other contemporary artists in this space?
Well, actually, in terms of contemporary artists, and particularly female artists, there are a number of them in the postmodern era of the 1990s. Artists like Emma Woods, Deborah Willis, and Renee Cox are recognized artists, setting precedents never before realized by Black women. Today, art by African American women is exhibited internationally. In 1990, Lorna Simpson was the first Black woman to present art at the Venice Biennale, one of the most renowned art exhibitions in the world. And that dates all the way back to 1859. That's even pre-proclamation.
Wow.
So marginalized artists are now being accepted in the mainstream of the art world. And some of them are actually earning a living based solely on creating their art.
Your audio is getting a little sketchy there. It's got some static. I'm hopeful that it gets better so we can complete the rest of the questions.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, I have another one, and this one is right up my alley. You know, everyone likes art. When they go to an art show, we all fantasize, "Ooh, I would love to own something like this or be able to buy something like this." Do we have a sense of what Bisa Butler's art is worth? How much do these things sell for?
Well, the scope of the prices may equal the size of those large scale images that she creates. All I know is that they are very, very expensive. You know, actually, Butler was a school teacher, as you heard in her biography, and she would spend her evenings making quilts and producing art. Certainly not to the scale and size that you've seen in her recent work. And she would exhibit wherever she can, you know, a fair in Jersey, a fair in New York, at churches in their auditoriums, wherever she was invited to exhibit. And this was before, of course, she quit teaching and worked full-time as an artist. In trying I actually did look up to see what the art would cost, because a couple of people did ask me, you know, can we reach out to Miss Butler, provide her with a photograph of one of our ancestors And would she be able to, you know, create some art out of that photograph? And I know that one person tried to do that and learned that the cost of the work is exorbitant. I think I tried to find who bought the art, and mostly it seems that her art was bought by museums and such. I know that if you want to purchase a piece of her art, I think the protocol is that you get an appointment for what is called an art auction. And that actually costs money. They claim that it begins at $30 and upward. And what the artists, I think not only Ms. Butler, but other artists in this line of work, in this line of art particularly, they try to find out whether you're buying the art for yourself, you know, or if you want to sell the art, you know, if it's part of an investment or something. And so I think that also determines what a piece could cost. But as to be able to give you a specific number for a specific piece of art, I don't have that information. Maybe one of the people on participating here today might have some more information. And if you do, please add it to the chat.
So basically you need to pay to be told whether you're worthy to buy their art, is what you're saying. It's a small fee, but still, it's like, yeah, okay, why do you want it, etc. And you're being interviewed to see if you're worthy and what the cost should be. It's interesting.
Oh, I'm not sure I would necessarily use the word worthy, but I think it's a way of the artist protecting their work. That's how I would view that.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Let me go back to the chat. Are there any other questions? Lost the chat. No? No more questions? Okay. Well, with that, Carol, Thelma, do you want to say a few more words?
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I hope this is the beginning of your interest in Ms. Butler. I hope that you will keep an eye out for her exhibits and get a chance to see her work in person. It is absolutely stunning. The experience is one that is very difficult to describe. You have to see it and feel it for yourself. And of course, in the interim, since COVID limits our activities, you'll just have to use the internet if you wish to know more about Ms. Butler and if you wish to have a closer examination of her work. Thanks to MonCoLibrary for allowing me to make this presentation, to share in telling the stories of African Americans in this time, in this important month of of sharing stories and information and knowledge about African Americans and about Black history. Thank you.